My son keeps talking to the audience. My son, Cade, is smart, only 6 years old, halfway through the first grade, and he's already begun reading books that even I struggle to get through. He's a sharp kid, but he does have some quirks. And listen, all kids have quirks. One thing I've learned as a relatively new father is that kids are weird. They talk to walls, eat bugs, see things in reflections that aren't there. You get the gist. Kids really do the darndest things. But recently, my son has reached a new level of oddity, one that is beyond my jurisdiction as the oblivious goofball daddy who still makes hot dogs for every meal. I became a single parent after my wife passed a few years back. It's been impossibly difficult. I won't sugarcoat it. Being the sole caretaker of Cade has been the single hardest thing I've ever had to do, next to attending my wife's funeral. Cade, though he was only 4 at the time, took his mother's passing very hard. He would ask for her constantly, throwing wild fits and thrashing around like a fish out of water. At any minor inconvenience, he would beg for his mother. I didn't know how to handle it. He'd often throw tantrums in public, wailing like a banshee in Home Depot as passersby stared, their judgment practically written all over their wide eyes. I felt utterly helpless. All I could do was attempt to calm him in a hushed tone, promising that Daddy was there to help him. But Daddy was not enough. Every child needs their mother. I remember wishing I had the funds to take Cade to see a child psychologist, or at least a licensed medical professional. I work in construction and barely make enough to pay each month's rent, let alone provide health care for my poor son. Looking back now, I should have downsized so I could afford it. Cade's explosive fits continued until a few months ago. These tantrums would occur every other day, if not daily. Then, suddenly, they dwindled to once a week. And after another month, none at all. I was relieved, to say the least. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. No more enduring the pointed glares from strangers as I hauled a hysterical Cade into the car, practicing the patience I never knew I had until fatherhood. But once Cade's meltdown ceased, a new issue presented itself, one that scared me far more than any tantrum I'd seen him throw. Imaginary friends. I know what you're thinking. Every kid has imaginary friends, and you're right. But Cade's imaginary friends were a little bit different. He called them the audience. It began one night during dinner when I had the bright idea to saute some spinach alongside boiling the usual hot dogs, in hopes that Cade would get his greens somehow. I scooped a generous heap onto his plate and placed it in front of him, beckoning him to try. "It's good," I said with a feigned smile. "Popeye eats it to get big and strong." Cade looked at the plate quizzically, then at me, and back at the plate. He sat there for a while, staring down the spinach as if it were the innards of an alien creature. He looked at me again as if I might be crazy, and then pushed the plate away. "No, thank you." "Cade," I said in a warning tone, my daddy voice making an appearance, "you have to at least try it." Cade made a humming noise, as if pondering this deeply, and began stroking his chin. "I'm not sure," he finally said. "Let me ask the audience." He turned to face the window next to the kitchen table. Although the window looked out onto our backyard, dusk had long since departed. The outside world was as dark as doom. My son, staring into a void, appeared as if he were simply looking at his own reflection. The lights in the kitchen and the contrasting darkness outside created a mirror-like effect. "What do you think?" There was a moment of deafening silence. I arched an eyebrow, waiting for a response from this mysterious, the audience. It was the first time I'd heard him mention them. I figured it was his new, foolproof method of avoiding any vegetable consumption that evening. After a moment too long, Cade turned back to face me. "They said no." I scoffed and gestured to his plate once more. "I'm sure they did. Now go on, have a bite." "No, I can't. I'm not allowed," he said again. "Cade, knock it off. Please eat your spinach," I insisted. "No, Daddy, they said no." I had assumed he would whine like he usually did when he didn't get his way. But this time, his tone sounded different. Desperation clung to his voice, as if he were begging me to understand. I dropped it. I was too tired to fight him. He went to bed with a belly full of hot dogs, unaccompanied by any sautéed spinach. Unfortunately, the audience wasn't as easy to get rid of as a plate of boiled hot dogs. The following week, Cade's imaginary friends made another appearance. I was trying to get him into his pajamas for bedtime. The usual routine went: pajamas, teeth brushing, bedtime story, lights out. Always the same order. But tonight was different. Cade decided to brush his teeth before changing into his pajamas. "What about PJs, buddy?" I asked, curious about his change in routine. He had been following this bedtime ritual the same way since before Mummy passed. I imagined the routine was comforting to him, a reminder of when Mummy was still around, which is why it was so odd that he suddenly switched things up. The audience told me to do it this way now, he replied, his mouth full of toothpaste froth. There they were again, the audience. A sudden curiosity crept into my mind. Why? Cade glanced quickly at his open bedroom window. I don't know. They just did. A sudden chill ran down my spine. I hadn't remembered those curtains being open. Curtains are always closed before the bedtime routine. I walked to the window and pulled them shut. After story time, when it was time for lights out, Cade refused to let me touch the light switch. Dad, the audience wants the lights on, he said, cupping his tiny hands over the switch on his bedroom wall, creating a makeshift barrier and refusing to budge. I rolled my eyes. Nice try, Cade, but the audience doesn't get to decide the rules. Fear flashed across his face as he snapped his head to look at me, wide-eyed. Don't say that, Daddy. His calm tone was eerie, and I took a step backward. Cade, please, you can't stay up all night just because the audience told you to. Yes, I can, Cade responded in a low voice, staring at the window with the curtains still closed. At that point, I was thoroughly unnerved. Something in my gut told me these imaginary friends were not very friendly, not just an excuse to avoid eating vegetables, but a way for Cade to get into trouble. Even so, I had paternal duties to attend to. Well, tell the audience to say goodnight. I scooped Cade into my arms despite his pleading and tiny fists of rage, placed him gently on his bed, and made my way toward his bedroom door, flicking the light switch off to signal that he had no choice in the matter. But the lights in Cade's room remained on. I stopped in my tracks, spun around and tried the switch once, twice, 3 times. The lights still wouldn't turn off. The switch must have been broken, I thought. Despite my rational explanation for the phenomenon, the panic bubbling in my chest did not subside. You're sleeping with me tonight, I declared. The next morning, the light switch started working again, and I was finally able to exhale the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. But that feeling of relief didn't last long. The week that followed was filled with even more peculiar coincidences. I say peculiar, but a more suitable adjective would be horrifying. On Friday, Cade said that the audience doesn't want him to go to school, and I got a flat tire on my way to drop him off. On Monday, he said that the audience doesn't like Jacob because he hogs the soccer ball during recess. Then on Tuesday, Jacob falls and breaks his arm, leaving him out of school for 2 weeks. On Thursday, Cade said that the audience doesn't like Mr. Teddy, his favorite stuffed animal, anymore. Mr. Teddy was later found slashed open from the belly up, with fluffy guts spilling from his abdomen. I began having trouble deciphering whether this was simply Cade's new method of acting out, or if there was truly some ominous force at play. I could have dismissed each occurrence by blaming Cade, but I knew in my soul that he wasn't that kind of kid. He was sensitive and bright. He was no teddy bear killer. The audience began to infiltrate my thoughts more than I cared for. It was all Cade talked about, and more often than not, the audience would lead him down a path of destruction. Everything came to a head this past Saturday night while I was in the bathroom, leaving Cade unattended in the living room watching an episode of his show. As I was washing my hands, I heard a loud crash, followed by the shattering of glass. I ran to the living room and found Cade, looking guilty as ever, standing next to a wedding picture of Mummy and me, with glass scattered across the hardwood floor, smashed to bits. My first instinct was to make sure he wasn't hurt, which, thank God, he wasn't. But afterward, an inexplicable anger coursed through me. Cade, why would you do something like that? I shouted. It wasn't me. It was them. The Otta, he began. Go to your room, I shouted, and Cade scurried up the stairs in tears. After a few minutes, feeling overwhelmed with guilt, I started toward his room to apologize. I stood in the doorway for a moment, preparing myself for a long apology when I heard Cade's voice. He was talking to someone in his room. Well, he was speaking to someone, but I heard no reply. But I don't want to do that, I heard him murmur. I love my daddy. I walked into Cade's room the instant I heard him mention me, and he looked spooked, as if I had caught him with his hand in the cookie jar. He was positioned by the window, kneeling, facing the blackness of the night beyond. I could have sworn I saw something moving by the window, a figure cloaked by the lightless sky. Cade, I said slowly, who are you talking to in here? Cade didn't respond. Instead, he got to his feet, arms hanging by his sides, and dramatically flopped onto his bed, his face pressed into the mattress, a clear, unspoken command of, "Get out of my room." Though I was still fixated on the window, exposed by the open curtains, I snapped out of my trance and refocused on my priorities. "Cade," I said softly, "Daddy is very sorry for yelling." Cade let out a soft, "Humph," but kept his face buried in the mattress, refusing to look at me. "Is there something you want to talk about? Maybe a reason why you're feeling sad?" I tried to coax, but he wouldn't budge. "It wasn't me," he mumbled, his voice muffled by the bedding. "It was them." "You didn't break that picture of Mommy and me, did you?" I asked. "No, it was them," he replied, his voice cracking as tears spilled down his cheeks. "They're everywhere, Daddy. I don't like them anymore." "Who, Cade? Who is everywhere?" I pressed. Cade was practically choking on his sobs. "The audience. They told me that you don't like me anymore because Mummy died. They told me Mummy got sick, lost all her hair, and now she's in the ground." My chest seized up. "Cade, who told you that?" I asked in disbelief. I had never told him that Mommy had gotten cancer. We had purposely sheltered him from the harsh truth at the very end, allowing only happy memories to seep through the cracks of his mind. "They did. They told me to open all the curtains so they could get you, Daddy." In that moment, as much as I hated to admit it, I was terrified. My heart raced as I watched my son, dripping with saliva and salty tears, imagine phantom arms reaching through the windowsills, dragging us into a never-ending nothingness. "Sweetheart," I said, taking a deep breath to steady my voice, "there's no such thing as the audience. They're imaginary. They're not going to get either of us. You're safe and sound here with me." I pulled him into a tight hug, determined to show that no force could ever take my Cade away. "They're real," he whispered, his head buried in my shoulder. That night, I lay with him in bed until he finally fell asleep. I was careful not to wake him as I kissed his rosy, tear-streaked cheeks goodnight, ensuring he was finally at peace. I felt a momentary sense of relief knowing he was tucked in bed, safe. Later, I made my way downstairs to tidy up the kitchen, cleaning the pile of stray dishes left from dinner. I went over to the sink and began scrubbing. I had only gotten through 3 or 4 dishes when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I froze, instinctively fixating on the pan mid-scrub. There was something in the window, something my intuition was screaming at me not to look. It was peeking at me, rising slowly into my peripheral vision. I felt the hairs on my arms stand on end, a chill surging through me. Something was right in front of me, standing at the window. I couldn't bring myself to look. To be completely honest, I was terrified. I could feel it staring at me, its eyes burning into the top of my head. I was afraid that if I acknowledged it, it would truly and entirely exist. In that motionless trance, I felt them begin to appear, one by one, emerging in front of every window in the house. This was their debut. I could feel each presence in my bones as they peered out, then slowly rose in front of every open window until they reached their full length. Soon they were all around me, staring through a thin sheet of glass. It was only a matter of time. I couldn't move, aside from my shaking hands clutching that bubble-soaked pan in the sink. All I could think about was my son. Cade was still upstairs. I couldn't abandon him. These forces had been tormenting him for weeks, and now was my chance to put a stop to it, to protect him. I knew I had only one option at this point. I sprang into action, launching myself from the kitchen sink and racing to my son's room. I saw them in the windows. They didn't move, didn't even flinch, as I bounded up the stairs. They were colorless blurs as I ran past them, and it was then I realized that my house had far too many windows. I could make out some of their features, and honestly, I wish I hadn't. Their eyes bulged unnaturally, so wide you could see the whites from top to bottom. Their mouths gaped open like the Scream painting, far too wide for any human, as if they had unhinged their jaws. Their skin was moist, pale, and hairless, with swollen heads, skinny necks, and bone-thin bodies, all fixed in a stare, utterly captivated by the show. But there were no screams. None except my own, of course. Only the relentless thumping of my heart as it hammered into my chest. I nearly tore Cade's door off its hinges, only to find him sleeping peacefully in bed. That's where we've been for the past few hours, hiding under his covers, waiting for this nightmare to end, if it ever does. All I know is this: if your kid ever tells you they're talking to the audience, run.